Okay, we've got our scene set up. We've got our wall, our floor textured, our 3D object textured. We've got our lights within our scene. I'm going to go ahead and turn our default lighting off here. And our 4 lights, we have an area light, we have a spotlight, we have a directional light, and a point light. Now we need to add shadows within this scene. And there are a couple of things you need to know when it comes to creating shadows within Vizrt T4. First, we're going to go into our scene settings again. Within the compositing tab, there is an option or a drop down here for shadows. So we need to make sure our shadows is enabled. If it's off, make sure you click the button and it should say on for them to be enabled. Now each one of our lights has its own shadow settings. So first, we're going to come into this area light, and one thing you need to know is that the area light does not create shadows. And one way to remember that is that if you come over into the area light and you try to click on the shadow on or off button, it will not work. So we're not going to use an area light ever to create a shadow. Let's turn that one off a while. We'll come down into our spotlight. We'll turn that on. We'll go into the spotlight settings or properties editor, and we're going to turn the shadow on. It's off by default, but we're going to turn it on. So within the scene, we still don't notice it, even though we turned our shadows on. The last thing that we need to do within Vizrt T4 to create shadows is to use the caster and receiver plugins to cast and receive a shadow. So I'm going to drag the caster up onto my shield object, and I'm going to drag my receiver onto the wall and our floor. And once we do that, we should start picking up the shadow here, and you can see it underneath the shield. So if you go into your spotlight here and start adjusting the rotation and or position, we can start seeing the shadow and how it affects the scene. So our spotlight, we added a bit of red to it, so you can see the spotlight here, and the cone is quite wide on it, so we could go back and adjust the cone or the angle of the cone to affect the shadow as well. If we come down into our directional light, we'll turn that on, and we come over into the directional light, and we need to make sure that shadow is enabled. And once we turn that shadow on in this directional light, you can see the shadow back here hitting both the back wall and the floor here. So going into your editor for the directional light, as you rotate it, you can see how it affects the shadow. If you rotate it on the X, Y, or Z, you can move the position of the shadow almost by moving the light. And then finally, we have the point light here. If we turn this on, this is a little bit more subtle, again, like a light bulb, so you really may need to increase the intensity of this quite a bit and or scale it up a bit to see any type of shadow depending where it is. So if we scale this up a little bit and we come into point lights settings, we can turn the shadow on, and there you can start to see the shadow for this point light. At any time, you notice we never see too much on the back wall, so we can come into our environment again and mess with that. We could actually turn the area light on. If we do turn the area light on, we can see a little bit of the back wall, but we could also increase the intensity of it as well, and or we could replace it altogether. If we just click on this environment map, it'll take us into other ones, and we can try to drag other environments in there to see what type of lighting that we can get. So if we want to replace that, you can see it gives us more of a darker or more bronze look there. And if we wanted to put another color a little bit in there, here's one with more green. Again, by adjusting this environment, you can raise or lower the intensity of it and or experiment with different environments that way. Now that we have our shadows and our lights set up, the one last thing that we're going to discuss within our scene is using the post effects.